So when we look at the mind from the point of view here of what Indian philosophy understands by the mind, or particular aspects of Indian philosophy, because Indian philosophy is a vast area. The most commonly known ones known as darshana. And darshana are here spoken in terms of 6 systems of Indian philosophy, altogether comprising that beautiful, if you will, scope, beautiful scope, Nya, Vaisheshik, Samkhya, Yoga, Karma Mimamsa, and Vedanta. Vedanta or Vedanta. So, 6 systems of Indian philosophy. And all of them sit together in beautiful, coherent way, because one comes as a platform which paves the way for another to unfold, culminating all in Vedanta, which is considered to be the end of the known, therefore the end of the knowledge itself, as sometimes is translated. But more correctly, it should be translated as the culmination, not the end. It's the culmination of all that cycle of knowledge. But it is the domain of Samkhya, which, by the way, serves as the platform for Ayurveda and many other branches of Vedic knowledge. But it is in Samkhya that this metaphysical picture of the world is given. And according to Samkhya, mind, as all other components of creation, all aspects of creation, belongs to one of the major forces of nature, because Samkhya philosophy deals with the concept of Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha is that immutable, what stands for the absolute, and Prakriti is the matter. It's the mother nature as the matter. And everything that sets in motion, of course, here, though comes from Purusha, Purusha is uninvolved, and Prakriti is where everything happens. Prakriti is the mover of shaker it all. And Prakriti works through 3 major forces. They are spoken of as the forces of nature, forces of creation. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. Any of you who have delved into the yoga or Ayurveda must have come across, even if once, about these concepts. What are they? Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. Sattva is equilibrium. It's that what upholds everything together. It's that what keeps everything together in equilibrium. It's that balance. Rajas is motion. Without Rajas, there is no movement, no motion. And whenever there is motion, there is heat. Psychologically, there is passion, desire. And Tamaguna, or Tamas, is that what comes as a result of that movement and forms into a structure. So it's everything that is or has structure. You can view even human body from that perspective. Then the physiology itself, the anatomy, will be the expression of Tamaguna. The senses that are constantly in motion will be the expression of the Rajaguna, Rajas. And guess what? Mind is Sattva. So mind in its essence is nothing other than equilibrium. Mind is Sattva. Despite the very well-known notion that somehow gained momentum of its own in the modern spirituality, of mind being blamed for all the calamities, right? The mind, along with ego, is often seen as a culprit of all that brings us misery one way or the other. And yet, if we are looking at this from the perspective of the philosophy, which has this uninterrupted investigation into these affairs of the spirit for millennia, mind is nothing other than the expression of sattva. So the mind itself is nothing other than the expression of equilibrium and light. And it is that what makes mind restless. Because up until the mind is not experiencing its essence, it's in the state of perturbed condition. Because its natural condition is that what is known as a repose, equilibrium. You see? Equilibrium, balance, light. And yet, the mind here moved, continuously moved by this invisible force of the pendulum. It is moved now to bring us back to the picture that we've been painting, to the domain of the senses. The senses move the mind out of its seat. And because the mind has identity, there is no mind without identity, unless it is an expanded mind. The mind itself, according to Samkhya philosophy, is the byproduct of the infusion of the intellect with the sense of selfhood. When mind is born, it's born out of that infusion. It's intellect, which is a finer category, more refined category of consciousness, infused with the sense of personal identity, gives rise to the mind. And yet, in essence, mind is sattva. And it is that what makes us restless. Because up until the mind finds its seat in consciousness, it cannot experience itself for what it is. Therefore, it is forever drawn. It is forever on the search. It is forever out there to get, to restore, to compensate. So you see what we're doing now? We're at once rehabilitating the nature of the mind. Rehabilitating. It's very important, because if we create a war on our mind, as in some cases, this is not a critical analysis, it's just simply to draw our attention. In some spiritual perspectives, the mind should be declared a state of war. We should have an enmity towards the mind, because the mind is being viewed as the enemy. The mind is that what obscures us from that what we are, from the essence of who we are. And yet here we are speaking of the mind in rehabilitative terms. Why? Because it's very important to understand that it's in the nature of the mind to be deceived until it is deceived no longer. So therefore the search here can only be seen in one term. It can only be seen in terms of the mind gains its seat. It gains its seat in consciousness, but only when it can experience itself for what it is. And now we can bring one of the Yoga Sutras, most perhaps reproduced Yoga Sutras to my knowledge. One of the most reproduced Yoga Sutras that probably graced the pages of all yoga magazines around the globe, doesn't matter the culture. Exactly. Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Cessation of the fluctuation of the mind is union. Or union is when mind's frequencies subside. Union is when the mind essentially is no longer, as the Buddhist would say. Mind, no mind. Don't mind the mind. Did you see that t-shirt? I love that. Don't mind the mind. This may seem as whatever. And yet, if we sit and ponder on this, some really important realization can ensue from that. Realization, why are we driven in the first place? Of course, counter questions may come, and they're welcome. And the counter questions, of course, will be in the nature, well, if these desires come, there must be a reason, there must be something to it. If these desires come, why do they come to me? They must be coming to consciousness, and we begin to speculate. We want to try to find some justification to why there is no peace of mind. But this is spoken from that perspective, for the one whose hand does not shake when it holds the scalpel. It requires that surgical precision. It requires that precision. Clarity is required. Strength of conviction is required. Knowing what one is doing. When you can work like that, then the truth can be revealed and shine forth in all its brilliance. This is why it is called the discerning sword of discrimination. It's the sword of discrimination which discerns the true from the untrue. And understanding what mind is in its essence, in its nature, is what essentially completes a very important phase of the search. It completes all the speculations about what if and as long as, if only, then. No. It's very simple. Mind will feel and will be bound to misery, because if it doesn't know its essence, and its essence is sattva, it has to be in a state of search. Therefore, fulfillment here is seen not even from the point of view, well, we may have the loftiest aspiration, we may place God, or whatever we may call it, whatever that almighty idea comes, and create all this, because this is, now we speak about the ultimate search. Ultimate search. As a footnote, by the way, when the guy who was trying to sell you his workshops as how to become a millionaire, right? He asked the question in the audience, so what would you like to achieve? And the guy there, being cheeky, right, says freedom. Forget about it. Freedom. What kind of freedom can you have if you cannot make 5 million, So he needs to keep to the theme, right? Not the kind of question, ridiculous, abstract question of freedom. He's right. People paying him for the workshop about how to become a millionaire, right? You don't come to the workshop how to become a millionaire and ask for freedom. You missed the address. You went to dentist and end up with the chiropractor, or. I've never seen chiropractor healing the toothache, like whatever. So, who am I to say? It's all quite amazing these days, Therefore, before we even begin to speak about fulfillment, before we even begin to speak about what brings the sense of fulfillment, we need to understand why there is this search for fulfillment. Why are we driven towards anything? Because A, the drive comes only from and at the level of the mind. And B, because the mind is, in essence, a balanced state. So, when we don't experience that balance, then we are at the mercy of going somewhere. We have to go somewhere. We have to saddle that horse, saddle that car, saddle something, and go in search of the lost treasure. This is cutting that search of understanding short, so that at least there is this clarity that the search itself comes from the place of lost state of balance. So in other words, Nothing in this world can bring us sense of fulfillment. It simply cannot, because, or as long as our mind is not experiencing that what is inborn nature of the mind. Paradoxically enough, if our mind experiencing or in its seat, it doesn't matter what we do. It is then does not matter what we do, because it's already found fulfillment. It's already fulfilled the very purpose of what mind is. It came full circle. Circle. It is a circus until its circle is complete. This requires clarity of cognition. Why there is this continuous propensity? There could be continuous propensity of spiritual knowledge, unstoppable in fact, constant, which is admirable. But at some point the questions may begin to rise. Why no amount of spiritual knowledge brings about the desired state of fulfillment? I'm not talking about material possessions, because the people out there now doing that job. Successful people now speaking about it. All this era have gone, right? The dream, that dream, the American dream, another dream, right? Yes, history is a nightmare from which we're all trying to awake, as one of the characters of the James Joyce's Ulysses said. Yes, when there's a horrendous war and we come out of it, then it's nice to drive a decent car and to have a decent meal to cook and to have a quiet evening to share. But then very quickly it fulfills itself and the evolution is unstoppable. Progress is unstoppable. So each to their own. At some point, it reached its level. People, the most successful people who kind of like out there supposed to have it all, speak candidly that fulfillment doesn't come neither from success, nor from utmost state of affluence, nor from any other whatever may be associated with this, because there are only three so-called, in old-fashioned way, evils, right? Power, what is it? Power, money, well, I forgot the third one. Doesn't matter. They're all connected. All connected. Well, it's all connected, right? It's all connected. Whatever our sense of identity finds momentarily satisfaction in a sense of I am being satisfied, until, of course, the great understanding begins to dawn that never was a time when it was about me. It's simply life lives itself through me. And I don't even know where that character is, where he or she begins, ends, and where it all comes from and where is it going to. But it takes some time before this dawns and that clarity there, until that flow of life is no longer seems to be a separate affair. So this is what I wanted to speak to in relation to fulfillment. So that the fulfillment is given that internal understanding that though fulfillment could be seen as a purpose of life, the very noble reason that why we're here, to fulfill ourselves. But then we need to be true to the very, very term of what it represents, to fulfill ourselves. Because if somehow we get momentarily attracted to the idea of to fulfill our aspirations, to fulfill our desires, then at least yogically speaking, we are essentially giving into that cycle. And that cycle is unbreakable until it is. That cycle where the desire, experience, sediment it's left, and the desire to re-experience that sets in motion this whole thing. And though it may seem to be at some point as a kind of progression, there are enough beings out there who have witnessed this as nothing other than catch-22. And when we realize that we are in a catch-22 situation, something else is required. I would say enormous realignment of creative forces is required to break that cycle of dependency, often also spoken in traditions for which I have profound respect as the machinery of experience. It's not even spoken in terms of human and humane, what have you, machinery of experience. We don't even know that we're humans up until we are locked in the machinery of that experience. It doesn't matter how we look, smell, talk, and so forth. It matters not how it appears to be on the outside. What matters is that what really taking place. What really taking place in terms of the subtlety of that experience, of what it means to be alive. What goes into that? What is it really all about? And before that takes place, it is that vicious circle of being locked into the machinery. The only difference here is that this is a biological machinery. Gut and brain reaction, but it's a still machinery. It grinds, it has its own, if you will, mechanism. You see? Nothing is owned here. It all works by itself. And it's not a place to be. Because in that condition, in that state, we essentially are prisoners of our conditioning and nothing else. We are simply prisoners of this biological conditioning. So, therefore, fulfillment is a very, very precious term. And when we speak of that sense of what brings the fulfillment, we should not stop at that level where that, okay, fulfillment is to realize the greatest of the great. But how can that be realized? That's a different story. Therefore, understanding here that it only belongs to the sphere of the mind. If one can quieten the mind, if the mind can become quiescent, then there's no longer search. There's no longer search. There's no search for fulfillment either. And what one does there is always secondary. It's not to promulgate here some kind of fatalistic, strongly influenced by the philosophy of karma notions that life is already lived in a sense that one has predetermined experience no matter what. But a degree of that understanding would certainly help. The degree of that understanding would certainly open up extra dimension to know why we have this life, and this life is as we experience it. Because otherwise, it all kind of shrouded in mystery, mysticism, in fatalism, and then of course many of us want to shake it off. And there is a lot out there sold as that self-improvement, often with no regard for understanding what the planets are in relation to our physiology and what the law of karma is in relation to our experience.